Hey, I'm Lone Candle. Going into Trump's election, there were a lot of fears of what this would mean for our future. And after almost a year of a Trump presidency, lots of complaints have been raised, as well as lies for and against Trump. Also, a lot of people have the attitude that nothing's different. There's no real change. That's wrong. My goal in this video is to look at what effects Trump has actually had. Now, a lot of stuff happens in a year, but I'm not focusing on things that happened during the Trump administration, or even things that government did during the Trump administration. But what has government done because of Trump? What is the Trump effect? I'll talk about some things that happened simply because Republicans control the Congress and the presidency. But my real focus is on things caused by Trump himself. Some policies would be implemented under almost any Republican president, so that is more of a Republican effect than a Trump effect. For example, the biggest piece of legislation, the tax overhaul, was a major Republican goal with or without Trump. So while Trump gets credit for this because he signed it into law and it happened under his leadership, there was nothing really special about Trump that made this happen that wouldn't have happened under a President Cruz, Bush, or Rubio. Although some details may have been different. I'll talk about some Republican effects because these can be considered Trump effects only in that they would not have happened if the American people elected Clinton over Trump. First, the Trump administration had a 90-day hiring freeze of government new hires. This was a blanket freeze that wasn't based on department or area need, which means it bears the cost of some people not getting hired that should have been because there was a legitimate need for people or for a replacement if someone left. Also, some people's lives were temporarily screwed up because they had accepted job offers that were canceled at the last minute. After 90 days, the freeze ended with new advice on how to hire. The cost of the freeze, while minor, are clear, while the benefits aren't. Maybe it will lead to an appropriately leaner workforce in the future. I don't know. The cancellation of the TPP. This is something that differentiated Trump from other Republicans. Clinton came out against it late, but she was involved in its negotiations and may have found a way to support a version of it anyways. This was an excruciatingly negotiated trade and rules agreement between the U.S. and several Asia-Pacific countries. It would have likely increased trade between such countries and resulted in more economic growth for the United States. Because the U.S. was a key player in this deal, these were kind of our rules. The U.S. would be setting the rules for the region rather than China, giving us more regional authority and influence. And low-skilled workers in foreign countries would benefit because the deal forces their governments to use basic regulations that protect workers, more similar to what we have in the U.S. Unfortunately, Trump canceled this deal, so we won't get the economic growth and regional authority that it would result in. And the regional authority deficit could be huge if it facilitates the rising and already large power of China to fill that void. Trump reinstated the Mexico City policy, which dictates that the U.S. will only give aid to non-governmental organizations on the condition that they don't use any of their funds to provide abortions, counsel patients about abortion, or advocate for more pro-choice laws. Other Republican presidents have applied this gag rule to U.S. family planning only, but Trump casted a much larger net, having this rule apply to $8.2 billion more worth of aid than it did before. This means such aid organizations will either have to change their abortion policies or have less money to help the needy. This money can go to other groups, but second-choice groups may provide second-rate services. Also, denying abortions to communities that can't take care of the children born can mean more kids living in poverty. Ironically, studies have found an association between this policy and more abortion, meaning the policy may be a total backfire. The reason being, health organizations that get less funding often prevent pregnancies through use of family planning and contraceptives. The lack of family planning and contraceptives means more pregnancies, which leads to more abortions. including unsafe abortions that no lack of abortion funding can prevent. It's likely that other Republicans would have approved the Dakota Access and Keystone pipelines. Trump did so, and they'll have a minor effect. They'll produce a few thousand temporary jobs during the construction period, and about 80 permanent jobs. Not game-changing, but sure helps those people. More oil should lower prices internationally, but could actually mean higher prices locally, because before the pipelines, it was much easier to sell Canadian oil to the Midwest compared to the world. The pipes do go through some Indian lands, including burial grounds. If there are leaks, Indian land, nature, and water can be damaged. Trump is making a major deregulation effort. Some say this is a sleeper that not a lot of people pay attention to, but could have a huge impact. Honestly, it's hard to figure out what has actually been deregulated and what has just been attempted. It's also hard to determine the ultimate effects. I'd expect short-term economic growth and benefits to those whose business or life the regulation was hampering, but potentially long-term consequences as environmental damage takes its effect, or people get screwed in the deregulated environment, or if the greed of individuals and markets harms us in ways some regulations could have prevented. Because I see regulation as a case-by-case issue, we'll just have to wait, study, and see the ultimate impact of Trump's deregulation pushes. I can say that the administration takes a heavy pro-industry approach when considering environmental regulation. Immigration. Trump has done a lot of things without Congress on immigration. In short, it is harder to be an illegal immigrant in the U.S. than it would have been without Trump. Through executive orders, he is further targeting illegals who have not committed any crimes. Well, other than, of course, illegal entry. This means more people who are peacefully living in the U.S., those who have jobs, friends, and family, are ripped from all of that and deported. This is a huge consequence for people whose only crime is crossing a line they weren't supposed to for the purpose of gaining a better life. ICE has tripled their bookings into detention of immigrants with no criminal histories. Trump is reopening cases of illegal immigrants who have already been given reprieve from deportation for the reason of having formed deep ties to the country while also not being considered a threat. Furthermore, Trump has slashed the number of refugees that can enter the U.S. from 110,000 to 50,000. This means more people in desperate situations will not be able to find refuge in the land of the free. Trump rescinded DACA, which protects immigrants brought here as young children from being deported. These are people who grew up in the U.S. and are therefore culturally American more than anything else. They could be forced to leave the only country they've ever known. Congress still has a chance to prevent this by passing some sort of DREAM Act. At least in the short term, it seems like Trump may have created a deterrence effect, causing less illegals to come because they fear his tough policies. Then there's the Muslim/travel ban. This is Trump trying to fulfill his campaign promise of banning Muslim immigrants. It has morphed into bans on certain Muslim-majority countries. This affects those who can't come here, who could have had a better life. It also hurts our relations with these and other Muslim countries. It's unlikely to have a benefit on terrorism because immigrants were already comprehensively vetted in a system that appeared to be working. That said, no vetting can be perfect, and the only way to be certain of stopping a terrorist or will-be terrorist from certain countries is to not let any in. One of Trump's biggest impacts is the nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Now, any other Republican president would also have appointed a conservative, so while the impact will be big and long-lasting, it's not much of a special Trump effect. Judges like Gorsuch will limit the government's ability to do what it decides is best for the populace, and will give a greater ability for people to ignore laws because they base their moral objection on their Christianity. Less value will be given to social justice, and there will be less common sense by instead favoring technical interpretations on things that don't actually apply to the situation at hand. Gorsuch is a pretty extreme originalist/textualist who gave rallying speeches to the Federalist Organization, sounding more like a right-wing politician than a neutral arbiter of the Constitution. For many, this sounds like a good thing. Either way, Gorsuch is a big consequence. On top of him, Trump is moving the federal judiciary in a more conservative direction with many appointments of judges to benches that sit below the Supreme Court. Trump tore up Obama rules that government contractors had to follow certain civil rights guidelines. Basically, these companies no longer have to comply with rules against discriminating based on sexual orientation, gender stereotyping, or gender identity. Also gone is wage transparency to help women gain equal pay for equal work, as well as a ban on forced arbitration, which had been used by companies to cover up sexual harassment. Now companies can use this sexual harassment concealing technique again. While I fear that the true motivation for these changes is an unreasonable lack of sympathy for possible discrimination based on gender or LGBTQ identities, the removal of these rules does relieve companies of the burdens of proving they have been compliant and of publicizing a wage scale. Trump is charging full force to reverse Obama's rules to limit global warming. Many of these will take time to go through. If you're concerned about global warming, this is bad. Not good. Bad. The president signed an executive order limiting its yearly $500 billion of contract work to domestic firms only. This means if a foreign firm was the best able to do a job for the best price, the American taxpayer is screwed with a higher bill and worse work. It also gives domestic firms less incentive to compete and innovate on account of the reduced competition. If Trump wants to hire only American workers for his businesses, he didn't, then that's fine. But he is burning taxpayer money on what amounts to a PR campaign to act like he cares about the American worker. Trump appears to have fired FBI Director James Comey because Trump didn't like how Comey was handling the Russian investigation. Comey recorded in his notes that Trump even inappropriately asked Comey to back off Michael Flynn. The administration claimed to have fired Comey because of his role in the Clinton email investigation, but that doesn't seem to go with anything Trump said before that point, so that looks like a false reason. There are at least two dangers here. One is losing good people for bad reasons. Comey appeared to be fulfilling his job competently. It's not going to help any organization to lose good people. More scarily, this is a threat to democracy. Our justice system needs to be able to investigate people for crimes, even if powerful people don't want those suspicions investigated, including the President of the United States. If this was an attempt by the President to stifle an investigation, then that could send our democracy down a dark path. This action sparked off the Mueller investigation, so whether or not anyone high up is guilty of something involving Russian collusion, so far our institutions are proving resilient. Remember, even if Trump is completely innocent of anything with Russia, we still want professionals in the FBI to be able to do their jobs and investigate so that in the future, when true crimes are committed, we can bring their sins to light and prosecute. Trump pardoned Sheriff Arpaio. The pardoning power is an important tool for an executive to forgive someone who is possibly falsely found guilty, or just who we should have special sympathies for and therefore want to reduce their sentence. Our founders saw the pardon power as both a check on the power of the justice system and a policy instrument, for example, in the case of settling the peace after a rebellion. In the case of Arpaio, he openly defied an order from a judge for 17 months. There are TV interviews and news releases of the sheriff admitting to his actions despite knowing they weren't allowed. Our judicial system can't have rogue sheriffs doing whatever they want. It's completely appropriate to have this defiance go through the system and have a punishment if that turns out to be suitable. There's not evidence of a miscarriage of justice here. So why did Trump pardon Arpaio? Arpaio strongly supported Trump during his campaign and appeared at rallies with him. They are both anti-immigration allies. The pardon power wasn't meant for people to escape justice because they're the president's ally. This is just one injustice, so you could argue that the consequences are quite small. But if this is how Trump operates, we can expect him to puncture more holes in the justice system. And there's a trend, with his actions on Comey appearing to also be motivated by defending his friend and ally from the justice system. Trump commented crudely on NFL players protesting, which re-exploded a divisive issue, causing many more players to protest during the anthem, and led to a bunch of pointless arguing among Americans that have enough division amongst them as it is. The tax bill. This is something that was on most Republicans' agendas. So, with the Republican House, Senate, and presidency, you'd likely see something like this. Thus, this is more of a Republican impact than a Trump one. That said, not nearly as many tax loopholes were taken out as should have been, or as the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, originally said he wanted. And that tends to happen because while most people don't follow particular loopholes that essentially steal their money, those who benefit do pay attention and lobby Congress hard. What can help overcome this is presidential leadership. Trump didn't seem to have much personal involvement in the details here, so a Trump consequence is likely a more loophole-filled tax system, which leads to more people getting breaks at the expense of the rest, as well as higher debt. Trump also seems to care less about debt than the average Republican. As far as the consequences of the tax bill, to sum it up really simply, everyone gets at least a small tax cut for 10 years, the wealthy will get much more than the average American, and corporations get a huge, permanent tax cut. This will mean much more debt, which could have disastrous consequences in the future, but will also mean a little bit more economic growth, and a little extra money for the average American. While the tax cut was shitty in the sense that it should have been revenue neutral by cutting more loopholes, keeping the estate tax, and not lowering the top rate for those who can better afford taxes, the changes to corporate taxes, including the lower rate and a move to a more territorial system, really are good changes that make U.S. corporations more competitive. We can hope that future Congresses will close more loopholes and raise taxes where it needs to in order to control the bill's debt impact. Not that I think hoping for future Congresses to behave financially is a good plan. Trump has assaulted Obamacare in multiple ways to make it even worse than it already was. This hurts Americans who now have to pay more for insurance. It would be one thing to replace Obamacare with a new plan, but the administration is just trying to force it to fail in every way that it legally can. This is only a good thing if you're someone who hates Obamacare at all costs, or if you think that by destroying it, it will force Congress to replace it with a better system, which is Trump's plan. Trump launched a strike on Syria. I agree with this decision, but I don't think this is a special Trump effect. I think even a third term of Obama would have done this. Obama almost struck Syria earlier, but held back at the last second when they agreed to give up their chemical weapons. There was a huge process, and Syria gave up a lot of these dangerous munitions. Assad claimed that he gave up them all, but he lied, and proved that he lied by using them. So then the jig was up, and the U.S. had no choice but to show it meant business, or give up completely. At that point, I think most leaders, including Obama, would have done a small strike like Trump did. When it comes to ISIS's quest to hold and control territory, they've pretty much been defeated. While they will be a threat around the world for a long time, this is a huge victory for the U.S. and their allies. The Commander-in-Chief gets credit for this, but this video is about what's more important, and that's cause and effect. ISIS was losing territory during the Obama administration, and it continued to lose territory during the Trump administration. Trump essentially just kept the same strategy, so this victory has nothing to do with Trump. Trump talks and tweets big with North Korea. Such talk could lead to miscalculation and war, or could lead to cowing the North Koreans into concessions. As of right now, it hasn't done anything obvious, but let's keep watching the developments. Something Trump did that I'm not sure anyone else would have is recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This hurt our relations with countries around the world, especially Muslim ones, and pretty much finished off the near-term peace process between Israel and Palestine. On these grounds, I'm not sure this is such a big deal. The peace process was already stuck in the mud, and I doubt the damage in relations will be permanent. More seriously is how this hurts our relations with the UN. The UN General Assembly voted to admonish the U.S. for this move. That alone doesn't mean much, but if it escalates into the U.S. defunding the organization that we created, then that could have serious consequences for maintaining peace and cooperation in the world. On the plus side, this helps relations with Israel and the truth. West Jerusalem, not Tel Aviv, actually functions as Israel's capital, and now we've recognized that. Not a good diplomatic thing to do, but it's hard for me to be upset with recognizing the truth. The final thing I want to mention are the repeated crude, divisive, and false things that Trump repeatedly says and tweets. These are definitely something special to Trump. While all politicians lie in a snaky politician way in order to not alienate supporters with the truth, Trump lies like someone with serious psychological issues. I often can't tell whether he knows what he's saying isn't true or whether he just has no care for the truth, so says whatever. Or whether he truly believes some of the stuff he says, even when it is verifiably false or misleading. It's probably a combination of these three. Other than the damage to the truth for the value of truth in and of itself, it's hard to say what the real harm of this is. Certainly, divisiveness makes it harder for us to comprehend the many and great issues of our day from points of relative objectivity. If people believe the lies, they may support policy based on falsehoods, which would be more likely to have negative consequences than policy based on facts. My worst fear is that we're changing the very nature of our society for the worst. We already had a problem with people focusing on their own news sources and dismissing or ignoring others. With Trump insulting or calling fake anything that points out one of his falsities, our country's ability to incorporate evidence and logic into our opinions may weaken even more. Those who study dictators around the world and in history have noted that Trump and his supporters' extreme devotion to falsehoods and their attacking of those who point out the truth is similar to the very anti-democratic leaders and forces they study. This is scary. Could Trump's ludicrous aversion to the truth lead to a less democratic America? Could it lead the country down the road to so much greater divisiveness that legitimate policy debates cannot be had, further weakening the country? Does his crude words facilitate the rough thinking of his supporters and critics? Short term, it does do some of these things, but maybe when Trump's terms are done, we'll go back to the normal level of bullshit we always had, which only seems sane by comparison. So, I won't put the major lies and crude words as a major consequence yet, but it's a minor one that we all should watch. This video isn't a comprehensive summary of all that Trump has done, but it gets a lot of the highlights. And as the years of the Trump presidency go on, some of this will change. Possibly everything I've gone over here was completely predictable. For anyone who paid attention to the campaign, you should have expected similar actions. So, if you like or don't like what has been done, the only person you can blame is yourself. Assuming you're an American citizen of age to vote and who didn't vote against Trump. If you are not this, then you get the joy and pleasure of blaming the American people, or more specifically, those who didn't vote against Trump. For those who generally like Trump's actions, exchange the word blame for something like praise. Good job. Well, I'm Lone Candle. Like me, comment me, love me.